Does anyone have to come to your husbands and say, hey, this danger is lurking right in front of you, protect yourself? No, you do it just fine. You initiate great when it's your own preservation, when it's your own protection, when you need to, even if it's from her, when you feel attacked by your wife, you protect yourself just great. You need to initiate in that way with your wife, on behalf of your wife, and for your wife. And the more she's coming to you from a position of unbearableness, the more you need to realize that's what she's missing. You have to initiate. You have to initiate. As a marriage counselor, one of the most difficult things is when couples come to me, and then I have to tell the husband, here's some things that would be good for you to do. Here's some ways you can love your wife. The mere fact that I'm telling them has already lessened and weakened the impact that they can have by doing it. Because their wife hears me telling them, and their wife thinks, well, Dave's looking out for me, but it's my husband. That doesn't help. They don't, frankly, want to be loved by me. They want to be loved by their husband. Men, initiate. Step forward and initiate. I know it's hard. By the way, man, this is one of the hardest things to do. It is really difficult. We'll talk about why in a second. But that's something for the men. Now, before I read these next verses, women, before you get mad at me, okay? Remember two things. One, I didn't write these. But the second thing is, I'm not reading them to reprove you. I want you to hear this very clearly. I'm reading them because I want you to see how the man reacts in these passages. I want you to understand something about the husband. This is not to teach you something about the wife. In fact, what you're going to see in these verses is, I think, simply a wife who's found her marriage intolerable and unbearable, and she's speaking out against it. She's trying to do something. The way she's doing it isn't helping, but I want you to see the man's response. And I want you to note how many of these there are, okay? There's not one verse here, there's several. Proverbs 21 says, better to live on the corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. Proverbs 25 says, better to live on the corner of the roof than share a house with a quarrelsome wife. Proverbs 19 says, a foolish son is his father's ruin, and a quarrelsome wife is like a constant dripping. Proverbs 27 says, a quarrelsome wife is like a constant dripping on a rainy day. Proverbs 21 says, better to live in the desert than with a quarrelsome and ill-tempered wife. Now again, if you read those verses and you say, okay, this is all a reproof against the wife, I want to back up for a second. That's not why I'm reading them this morning. I want you to see the man's reaction. What does the man do when he feels like the wife is nagging and contentious and dripping and quarreling and all that? What does he do? He moves to the roof. He moves to the desert. He goes away. He backs off. I want you to notice, though, the difference here. When a woman is in a marriage where she feels unloved, what does she do? She reacts from her unbearableness, which often means she moves forward, doesn't it? She moves toward her husband, trying to get him to change something, trying to get him to love her. She responds and she speaks and she's trying to fix something. She's trying to get rid of this unbearable feeling of not being loved. What does the husband do when he feels unloved in a marriage? Does he move forward and try to fix? No, what he does is he says, okay, it's not worth it. Backs up. He will probably, in most cases, stay in the marriage, but emotionally he'll back up. He'll back up. He'll stay at work. He'll do whatever. He'll move to the corner of the house. He'll turn on the TV. He will isolate himself. You know why? It's because he can do it. Fair or not fair, it's the way God created men. They don't have that ball of yarn. They can just shut the door on their marriage and go to another room. Is it good? No, it's terrible. Does it mean he doesn't care? No, it means he cares a lot. He cares so much, it hurts so much, he would rather shut off the things he loves than be subjected to it. Women, what your husband needs, when you find him withdrawing and you find him in this position, the role that God has given you for him is different than the role he's given for the husband. God doesn't ask you to lay your life down in the same precise way he does the husband. He asks you to behave in ways which will turn down the spigot. Now, wives, I understand. I'm going to share some things and you're going to say, but that is, if I stop quarreling, if I stop dripping, he's going to have nothing to bug him. Life will go the way it's always been, the status quo will be the way it's always been, and the marriage will never get better. I understand that's the argument. Just for a moment, just entertain the possibility that the way God has designed things to work is actually counterintuitive to the way it really feels like it ought to work to you. Because the husbands have the same issue. When I tell them to initiate, You know what most husbands say to me? Doesn't make any difference. Nothing I do will affect my wife. I can't do enough to please her. It's counterintuitive for them to keep trying. They feel like everything they do makes it worse. Bear in mind that sometimes the way things work actually is counterintuitive. Let's move on here. Let me give you some things for the wife here. Appreciate your husband. Look, you married your husband. At one time, there was something you appreciated. There are still things today you appreciate. If you can just begin to get your mind around it. If you can begin to take that ball of yarn and say, yeah, there's some things that are really lousy. What do I appreciate about my husband? What is there that I can appreciate? Admire your husband. Same issue. You married your husband, there were things you admired. Those things are probably not gone. You've just been submerged under things that you can't stand. Or maybe your marriage is going pretty well, but you find you don't appreciate and admire your husband enough. Maybe he's starting to withdraw a little bit. He reads this appreciation, this admiration, and this respect. He reads it as love. You have to understand that. It isn't different than love. It isn't less than love. It is love. This is how he reads love. Key word is support. Key word is support. Support your husbands. How does it work? How do you do it? What does that mean? Do you need help learning how to do that? All those things are things you're going to have to wrestle with. I can't get into all those answers right now, but you gotta start looking at it this way. And I want you to think about the vicious cycle that occurs in marriages. And we'll hit the other 4 keys pretty quickly. This one I wanted to give time to. I want you to consider the vicious cycle that occurs here. Think about the way this works. See, this is one of those things which, because of the fall, it works backwards. And because it works backwards, it seems almost a cruel joke from God. But if you can get your mind in the right place, you can see that it's because the flip side is really beautiful. Here's what happens, though, that looks almost cruel. The woman is driven by this sense of unbearableness to go forward to her husband. Every time she goes to her husband, he hears it as disrespect. He hears it as quarreling. He hears it as nagging. He hears it as a lack of appreciation and admiration. What does he do? He backs away. Every time he backs away, how does that make the wife feel? Unloved. So what does she do? She rushes forward to fill the gap. Every time she rushes forward to fill the gap, what does he hear? Drip, drip, drip. What does he do? He backs up. What does she do? She rushes forward. What does he do? He backs up. This is terrible. How do you get out of this kind of thing? You know what's interesting? Interesting, sad, tragic, terrible. By the time most people come to me for marriage counseling, the woman is being so incredibly dramatic, and the husband is being completely deaf. Because the cycle has hit such a peak where the woman is doing everything she can to say, listen to me. And the husband is saying, na, 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 na. And it's not because neither of them have ever tried a different approach. I hear that too. The husband says, I tried laying my life down for her. And you know what I did? I laid my life down for her, and she walked right over the top of me. And the wife says, I've tried supporting him. And you know what I did? I supported him, and he totally disappeared. It's because that cycle's so ingrained. It's because you get to a place where, your wife is making a huge effort to be supportive, but it's not coming across as a huge amount of support. Your husband is making a huge effort to lay his life down, but it's not coming across as anything. And you're both terrified of the pain. Who wants to do this cycle anymore? Nobody. But this is where the devil wins. Because what God says, and I'm going to say this as clearly as I can, he says this in a lot of things, but this will change your marriage if you can grasp this. Even if your marriage is good, this will change your marriage if you can grasp this. Make it great. The only thing that gets out of a cycle like that, hear me clearly, is somebody being willing to die. I said it that way because I want you to go, what? Okay, is it worth it? It is worth it. But the only thing that gets you out of a cycle is somebody being willing to face the thing that feels and looks most like death to them. And it makes perfect sense, because the cycle God has in mind is exactly the opposite. The cycle God has in mind is a husband who cherishes his wife, and she feels totally protected. And as she feels protected and loved, she responds with admiration and respect. And as she responds with admiration and respect, he moves closer to her to love her more, because that's so cool to be affirmed that way. And as he moves closer to her, she feels so much more loved, and she has so much more admiration for him. And he moves closer, and she moves closer, and he moves closer. And it's a beautiful thing. But to get from one